Now we are going to discuss Raynaud's phenomena. So certain patients are coming to us saying that, sir, there is episodic digital ischemia. Means whenever there is exposure to vibrating tools, there is exposure to cold, or sometimes because of emotional stress, my digits becomes white. And after that what happens? It becomes blue, there is cyanosis, and then there is some pain and there is redness. So what is this? This is known as Raynaud's phenomena, and it is because of episodic digital ischemia. Why? Because of certain stimulus, there is vasoconstriction in small blood vessels. So what is Raynaud's phenomena? It is episodic digital ischemia. Episodic digital ischemia. Why? Because of constriction of smaller blood vessels, and this is generally on exposure of cold. Because of exposure of cold, if the patient is using vibrating tools, so use of vibrating tools, or because of emotional stress. Emotional stress. Now see what happens here. There is sequential development of blanching followed by cyanosis followed by redness. So in these patients there is sequential development of blanching, or digits become white, and after that there is bluish discoloration, so digits are cyanosed, and then there is redness. So how to remember the sequence? Boys common room. So the sequence is boys common room, blanching, cyanosis, redness. Sometimes image based questions are also given. See how it looks like. Now see, there is blanching, then there is cyanosis, and then redness. Now what is the problem? In blanching there is local syncope, and what's the cause of this local syncope? There is spasm of arterioles. Clear? That's why you can notice that the digits become white. Clear? After that what happens? There is local asphyxia. In this particular stage, there is dilatation of capillaries and venules, and whenever there is dilatation of capillaries and venules, there is collection of what? Deoxygenated blood. And since there is collection of this deoxygenated blood, can you see the appearance? It is bluish. So here, there is local asphyxia and there is cyanosis. What's the cause? Dilatation of capillaries and venules leading to collection of deoxygenated blood. In third stage, there is recovery. So what happens? Whatever the spasm was there is a resolution of digital spasm, and in that case you will find what? Redness. So this is the sequence: blanching, cyanosis, redness. See, this condition is more common in fingers and toes. It is relatively more common in fingers. So clinical presentation, this is the sequence: blanching, cyanosis, redness. It is relatively more common in fingers as compared to toes. Clear? And in these cases, if you are going to palpate the pulses, radial, ulnar, pedal, all these pulses are normal. Important point: radial, ulnar and pedal pulses. Radial, ulnar and pedal pulses are normal. Okay. Now what are the types of Raynaud's phenomena? It is of two types. One is primary or idiopathic, and second is secondary. Secondary is because of something. Primary or idiopathic Raynaud's phenomena, it is known as Raynaud's disease. So what are the types? Types of Raynaud's phenomena: primary or idiopathic, primary or idiopathic, and this is known as Raynaud's disease. This is Raynaud's disease. Clear? And if it is secondary to something, this is known as secondary Raynaud's phenomenon. Now how we are going to treat or manage this condition? We are going to ask the patient that what's the stimulus because of which you are going to develop these manifestations. So sometimes there is exposure to cold, sometimes there is exposure to or use of vibrating tools. So we are going to ask the patient that avoid the stimulus, and you can't believe more than 90% patients improve after avoiding the stimulus. And if there is no improvement even after avoiding the stimulus, or the symptoms are severe, in these patients we give what? Calcium channel blockers. So how we manage? Management. More than 90% patients improve after avoiding the stimulus. So avoid the stimulus. Clear? And there is improvement. If there is no improvement even after avoiding the stimulus, if there is no improvement, in such patients we are going to advise calcium channel blockers. Clear? And generally what are the agents we give? We give diltiazem and nifedipine. So the agents which we give, diltiazem and nifedipine. Clear? So this is how we manage the patients of Raynaud's phenomenon. Now we are going to discuss acute mesenteric ischemia. It's very easy to understand the concept of ischemia. Imagine that this is an organ, okay, and this organ is having arterial supply. So there is arterial supply and there is venous drainage. Clear? So this is the arterial supply and this is the venous drainage, right? Now imagine if there is occlusion of artery, or there is arterial thrombosis, or there is vasoconstriction. So see, if there is arterial occlusion, or there is arterial thrombosis, or there is vasoconstriction in the artery, in all these cases there will be ischemia. And whenever there is venous thrombosis in the vein, if there is thrombosis, what happens? There is impaired drainage, so there will be collection of deoxygenated blood. Here also there will be ischemia, right? And what is the most common cause of acute mesenteric ischemia? It's the occlusion of mesenteric artery. Which one? Superior mesenteric artery. And what kind of occlusion? It's the embolic occlusion. Okay, so see what are the types and what are the causes. First, embolic occlusion. Clear? This is the most common cause and it is responsible for 50% of cases of acute mesenteric ischemia. So generally emboli is formed in left atrium because of atrial fibrillation, because of arrhythmia, and sometimes in the patients of myocardial infarction. So what are the causes of embolic occlusion? There is formation of embolus because of arrhythmia, because of valvular heart disease, or in the patients of myocardial infarction. Okay. Second cause is arterial thrombosis, and this is responsible for 25% of cases of acute mesenteric ischemia. So second is arterial thrombosis. And what's the cause of this arterial thrombosis? Yes, the cause is atherosclerosis. Clear? So this one is responsible for 25% cases and the cause is atherosclerosis. Okay. Third situation is non-occlusive mesenteric ischemia. So actual occlusion is not there inside the vessel, but what is the problem? Because of certain precipitating events, there is severe vasoconstriction in the mesenteric vessels, and this is known as non-occlusive mesenteric ischemia. So third is non-occlusive mesenteric ischemia, in short known as NOMI. Clear? And this is responsible for 5 to 15% of cases. So any condition in which there is severe vasoconstriction in mesenteric vessels, what happens? Any condition. So whenever there is excessive fluid loss, whenever patient is having heart failure, there is massive burns, patients of sepsis, acute pancreatitis, and acute pancreatitis also you must be knowing that there is third space loss, and in patients of acute myocardial infarction. Clear? So these are related to artery. And what's the fourth cause? Venous thrombosis. Clear? Venous thrombosis. Why? Because of venous thrombosis, there is impaired venous drainage. clear, and it leads to acute mesenteric ischemia. So what's the name of that condition? It's the mesenteric venous thrombosis. So these are the causes. Generally, in patients of acute mesenteric ischemia, irrespective of the causes, you will notice that clinical profile or clinical manifestation is very similar and the presentation is almost identical. So what are the clinical features of acute mesenteric ischemia? See, these patients are having severe abdominal pain, and here symptom is out of proportion of signs. So severe abdominal pain, patients are having multiple episodes of vomiting, there is diarrhea also. Now initially there is ischemia. Over a period of time, if there is delay in diagnosis or there is late presentation, these patients are having what? Hematochezia. There is melena. And if patient is brought at a later stage when there is already gangrene, so these patients are going to develop what? Hypotension, shock, and certain patients are going to develop septicemia. So these are the manifestations. So what is the most common symptom? It's the severe abdominal pain. And this severe abdominal pain, it's out of proportion. It's out of proportion of physical examination findings. So it is out of proportion of signs. Physical examination findings or sign. Clear? There is persistent vomiting, diarrhea, there is melena, hematochezia, and in late stages what? Patient might develop shock leading to hypovolemia. So there is hypovolemia, and what? There is sepsis. Clear? Why? Because initially there is ischemia, and if there is delay in diagnosis or late presentation, these patients are going to develop bowel gangrene. And when there is development of bowel gangrene, there is what? Septicemia, there is shock, hematochezia or melena. Clear? This question was asked in INI CET. Now see the presentation. The question was that a patient was having irregular rhythm. The pulse rate was irregular. This patient was having severe abdominal pain with persistent vomiting, diarrhea. There was passage of blood in the stool, but there was no guarding and rigidity. So these findings are highly suggestive of which condition? Acute mesenteric ischemia. Because there was arrhythmia, so there was embolus. Because of embolus, there was embolic occlusion, and this was the manifestation. Since in majority of cases the etiology is in relation to superior mesenteric artery, so what is the investigation of choice? It is the mesenteric arteriography. Clear? So diagnosis. Investigation of choice for diagnosis, it is the mesenteric arteriography. Mesenteric arteriography. Okay. Now there is a classical finding which is seen in the patients of non-occlusive mesenteric ischemia. See that finding. So in this mesenteric arteriography, you can see what? There is vasoconstriction, there is dilatation, there is vasoconstriction, dilatation. So this is known as string of sausages sign. So what's the name? Can you see this arrow? So this is known as string of sausages sign. And this string of sausages sign, it is seen in non-occlusive mesenteric ischemia. So this is seen in non-occlusive mesenteric ischemia. Now management. See here, suspicion is most important. So early diagnosis is the most important part of the management, because delay in diagnosis can lead to gangrene of the bowel. So whenever we suspect this particular condition, that the patient is having acute mesenteric ischemia, what? We take the patient to OT and we start resuscitation. This resuscitation is done in OT itself. So first, early diagnosis, and then we go for aggressive resuscitation. And generally you have seen that we are going to resuscitate most of the patients in emergency itself, but this patient is taken to OT and there we resuscitate so that there is no delay. So we give IV fluids, we give IV antibiotics. Clear? So the principle of management is early revascularization. So imagine if a patient is having non-occlusive mesenteric ischemia. So we go for catheter direct papaverine infusion in superior mesenteric artery. So what we follow in such patients? Early revascularization. What's done? Early revascularization. Okay. So if patient is having non-occlusive mesenteric ischemia, there is vasoconstriction. So what we do? We go for catheter directed papaverine infusion. Clear? And this infusion is in the superior mesenteric artery. So infusion in which particular artery? Superior mesenteric artery. Clear? And this is going to relieve the spasm of superior mesenteric artery and patient is going to improve. But this is done for non-occlusive mesenteric ischemia. Now imagine if the patient is having mesenteric venous thrombosis. Clear? For venous thrombosis, one of the risk factors is hypercoagulable state. So what we want that there should not be further progression of venous thrombosis. So in such patients, what should be started? We have to start anticoagulants. Why we are supposed to start anticoagulants? Because we want to prevent the propagation of mesenteric thrombus. To prevent propagation, what we have to start? The anticoagulants. Okay, so we have to perform the exploratory laparotomy. So there are two categories of patients who are brought to the emergency. One, the patients who are not having peritonitis. So if patient is not having peritonitis, in such patients we give supportive care, we go for papaverine infusion, and we go for anticoagulants. But if patient is going to develop peritonitis, obviously we have to perform what? Exploratory laparotomy. And on exploratory laparotomy, you are going to find what? Gangrenous bowel. So if the bowel is gangrenous, we have to perform the resection and anastomosis. There is a second situation in which patient is already having peritonitis. Clear? So after resuscitation of such patients, we perform what? Exploratory laparotomy. And on exploratory laparotomy, if there is presence of necrotic bowel, generally we go for resection of necrotic bowel. So on an average, see how we manage the patients. If the patient is having peritonitis, whether patient is having peritonitis or not having. If there is no peritonitis, in such patients generally we go for supportive care. So we provide supportive care. We go for papaverine infusion. Clear? Papaverine infusion. And the patients who are having mesenteric venous thrombosis, in those cases we give anticoagulants. Simple. And the second situation where patient is already having peritonitis, in these patients we go for exploratory laparotomy plus resection of necrotic bowel. Resection of necrotic bowel. Clear? So this is how we manage the patients of acute mesenteric ischemia. Now in detail we are going to discuss the mesenteric venous thrombosis. So for venous thrombosis, there is a triad which should be positive, and there is a virtuous triad. What are the components? Stasis, endothelial injury, and hypercoagulable state. And one of the most important triad is what? Hypercoagulable state. So the patients who are going to develop mesenteric venous thrombosis, generally in these patients there is one of the hypercoagulable state which is present. So certain patients are having congenital disorders, some patients are having OCPs. Clear? So this is mesenteric venous thrombosis, and it's responsible for 5 to 15% patients of acute mesenteric ischemia. Okay, so what is the most commonly involved vessel? It is superior mesenteric vein or inferior mesenteric vein. So generally inferior mesenteric vein is spared, and here most commonly involved vessel is superior mesenteric vein. So what's the most commonly involved vessel? And that's superior mesenteric vein. Important point that inferior mesenteric vein is generally spared. Clear? Now coming to the clinical features. Clinical features will be almost same like acute mesenteric ischemia. So there is severe abdominal pain out of proportion to physical findings. These patients are having persistent vomiting. There is diarrhea, hematochezia, melena. And in late stages, patients are going to develop what? Shock because of hypovolemia or sepsis. This is the presentation. So here, investigation of choice is a bit different. So for diagnosis, what's the investigation of choice for diagnosis? And it is CCT. The investigation of choice for diagnosis is CCT. And how we are going to manage? Generally, you know that in patients of venous thrombosis, we have to start the anticoagulants. So here we start systemic anticoagulants. So rapid initiation of systemic anticoagulation. Rapid initiation. Clear? And generally whenever we are performing the surgery, we have to use heparin. So heparin is used intraoperatively. It is used intraoperatively. Okay? So generally intraoperatively we are using anticoagulants. There is another important point, whether we have to continue the anticoagulants in post-operative period or not. So we have to continue because most of the patients are having some inherited or acquired hypercoagulable state. So if you are not giving anticoagulants in post-operative period, there is increased risk of recurrence. So what? Continue anticoagulants. Continue anticoagulants even in post-operative period. Why? To prevent the recurrence. So we have to continue anticoagulants even in post-operative period to prevent the recurrence. Why? How much is the recurrence rate? You can't believe the recurrence rate is 35 to 70%. This is the recurrence rate. That's why we have to continue. Second situation, if the patient is having evidence of peritonitis, in such patients, if the patient is having peritonitis, in these patients, we go for exploratory laparotomy. And if there is gangrenous bowel, we perform the resection of gangrenous bowel. So this is how we manage the patients of mesenteric venous thrombosis. Certain patients who are having advanced atherosclerosis, because of advanced atherosclerosis, there is involvement of multiple mesenteric vessels, means involvement of both superior and inferior mesenteric vein. And these patients are going to develop what? Chronic mesenteric ischemia. So first important point, that what's the most common cause of chronic mesenteric ischemia? It's caused by advanced atherosclerosis. Most common cause? Advanced atherosclerosis. Clear? With involvement of multiple mesenteric vessels. See, there is a collateral between superior mesenteric artery and inferior mesenteric artery. So this condition is rare. So whenever there is involvement of both superior mesenteric artery and inferior mesenteric artery, these patients are going to develop chronic mesenteric ischemia. But this is a rare situation. Why? Because there is extensive collateral network between these two arteries. So what is the problem here? These patients are having atherosclerosis. So what are the risk factors for chronic mesenteric ischemia? The risk factors which are important for atherosclerosis. So the risk factors of atherosclerosis are the risk factors for chronic mesenteric ischemia. So see, what are the risk factors? Risk factors for chronic mesenteric ischemia. So you can see positive family history, hypertension, smoking, hypercholesterolemia. These are the risk factors for atherosclerosis also, and these are the risk factors for chronic mesenteric ischemia. Now what are the problems in these patients? What is the normal physiology? See, whenever we are going to eat something, means after meals, the blood is diverted to the mesenteric vessels. Why? Because of digestion. So blood is diverted to the mesenteric vessels after the meals. In such patients, since there is severe atherosclerosis with involvement of superior mesenteric artery and inferior mesenteric artery, after meals, these patients are going to complain of crampy abdominal pain. So these patients are having postprandial abdominal pain. And what kind of crampy abdominal pain? Clear? And generally this pain is going to last for 15 to 45 minutes. And why there is ischemia? Because of increased demand after the food. So there is crampy abdominal pain. This condition is also known as intestinal angina or intestinal claudication. Clear? So see the clinical features. In these patients there is postprandial abdominal pain. And generally this postprandial abdominal pain, it is going to last for 15 to 45 minutes. And what's the cause? There is ischemia. Why? Because after meals the blood flow should be increased to the mesenteric vessel, but this is not happening here. What kind of pain is there? It's crampy abdominal pain. So it's the crampy pain. Clear? Other name, it is also known as intestinal angina or intestinal claudication. Other name of this condition, intestinal angina or intestinal claudication. Okay, so over a period of time this patient is going to understand that whenever patient is going to have meals, patient is having this kind of severe crampy pain, and that's why most of the patients are having some kind of fear or aversion of food. So there is fear or aversion for the food, and that's why over a period of time patients are going to develop what? Weight loss also. So these patients have fear. So there is fear or aversion for food. Okay, and because of this, what's the problem? These patients are going to develop weight loss. So there is weight loss. Now how we are going to make the diagnosis? First, we want to assess the flow in the mesenteric vessels. So we want to see the anatomy, we want to assess the flow in the mesenteric vessels, and for that we go for duplex scan. So one investigation which is performed, that is duplex scan. Why? We want to assess the flow and anatomy. By the way, what's the investigation of choice for diagnosis? It is aortography. So investigation of choice for diagnosis, this is aortography. Okay, 3 questions which are asked related to investigation. First, investigation of choice for diagnosis of acute mesenteric ischemia. We discussed mesenteric arteriography or mesenteric angiography. Investigation of choice for diagnosis of mesenteric venous thrombosis, CCT, and investigation of choice for chronic mesenteric ischemia, and that is what? Aortography. Now see how we are going to manage. So generally we have to go for the revascularization procedure, and the kind of management will be dependent on the age. So imagine there is one elderly patient. So patient is elderly. In these patients we go for either balloon angioplasty or stent placement. So for elderly patient, which method of revascularization? Balloon angioplasty, or we go for stent placement. Stent placement. Clear? And what is the definitive treatment, by the way? Definitive treatment of chronic mesenteric ischemia. So here we perform transaortic end arterectomy, or we go for bypass grafting. So we go for transaortic end arterectomy. Clear? Or we go for bypass grafting, right? So this is how we manage the patients of chronic mesenteric ischemia. Now we are going to discuss subclavian artery stenosis. Before discussing subclavian artery stenosis, let's first see what are the branches of arch of aorta. So here you can see the branches are: first, this is brachiocephalic artery, this one is left common carotid artery, this is left common carotid artery, and you can see this is the left subclavian artery. Okay, now this brachiocephalic artery, it is going to divide into, this is right common carotid artery and this is right subclavian artery. Clear? So what are the branches? Brachiocephalic artery, left common carotid artery and left subclavian artery. Brachiocephalic artery is going to divide into right common carotid and right subclavian artery. Now here you can see there is right vertebral artery and left vertebral artery, which is a branch of subclavian artery. So what happens? First important point, that what is the most common cause of subclavian artery stenosis? And it is atherosclerosis. And if you are going to compare the right subclavian artery and left subclavian artery, what is the most common site? It is more common in left subclavian artery. Okay, so see the questions. First, what's the most common cause of subclavian artery stenosis? And this is atherosclerosis. Okay, atherosclerosis, right? It is more common in left subclavian artery. So as compared to right subclavian artery, it is more common in left subclavian artery. Now in subclavian artery, what is the most common site? So it's the first part. Most common site in subclavian artery, it is the first part. Clear? So first part of subclavian artery is most commonly affected. Now here you can see this is the left subclavian artery, and here you can notice that this is the site of stenosis. Can you see here? So there is stenosis, you can see. Clear? Now the problem, you can see this vertebral artery, it's a branch of subclavian artery, and both of these vertebral arteries are going to join and form what? Basilar artery. It's going to form basilar artery. Okay, so this is what? Vertebro-basilar circulation. Now what is the problem? Whenever the patient is having subclavian artery stenosis, now see, if the patient is doing some kind of work or exercise by this left upper limb, whenever some muscle is doing some work or exercise, in the blood vessels supplying the muscles, in the blood vessels which are supplying the muscles, there is vasodilatation. So in these blood vessels which are supplying the working muscles, there will be vasodilatation. So there is decreased pressure, right? And there should be increased flow. But what is the problem? In this case, you can see here is the stenosis. So it is not going to fulfill the demand. And that's why what will be the problem? There will be reversal of blood flow in the ipsilateral vertebral artery. So here you can see there will be reversal of blood flow in this ipsilateral vertebral artery, and it is going to supply the working or exercising arm. So what happens here? The blood is being stolen from the posterior circulation to supply the working or exercising arm. And what's the name of this condition? This is known as subclavian steal syndrome. So what's the problem? This is known as subclavian steal syndrome. Clear? And what happens in subclavian steal syndrome? There is reversal of blood flow in ipsilateral vertebral artery, and this was the question which was asked in AIIMS. Okay, so what's the problem? During work or exercise, there is reversal of blood flow. Reversal of blood flow in, you have to remember, ipsilateral vertebral artery. Clear? And because of this reversal of blood flow in the ipsilateral vertebral artery, what happens? There is vertebro-basilar ischemia. But good thing that in majority of patients it is asymptomatic. Only in severe cases it is symptomatic. And if patient is having severe subclavian artery stenosis, then patient is going to develop transient vertebro-basilar ischemia. Okay, so good thing that it is asymptomatic in majority. In majority of cases it is asymptomatic. Clear? In severe cases only in severe cases it is symptomatic. Clear? So what kind of symptoms will be there? The symptoms will be of transient vertebro-basilar ischemia. So patient is going to develop transient vertebro-basilar ischemia. Okay, so this is posterior circulation, and this posterior circulation is going to supply cerebellum and occipital cortex. So these patients are going to develop what? Ataxia, vertigo, dizziness, and since it is supplying the visual cortex also, so what? Visual abnormalities. So what are the manifestations? Patients are going to develop weakness. So there is weakness, there can be syncope, there can be vertigo, there can be dizziness or ataxia because of involvement of what, cerebellum, and these patients are also having what, visual abnormalities. Why? Because of involvement of visual cortex. Clear? So these are the manifestations of subclavian-Steele syndrome. Now we are going to discuss aneurysm. So what is the definition of aneurysm? It is irreversible localized dilatation of blood vessel. What kind of? It is irreversible localized dilatation of blood vessel. Okay, so irreversible localized dilatation of blood vessel with at least 50% increase in the diameter. How much? At least 50% increase in the diameter. So how much? At least 50% increase in diameter. Simple. Now see, there are certain situations where there is irreversible localized dilatation, but the diameter is less than 50%. Increase in diameter is less than 50%, and that is known as ectasia. So in ectasia, how much is the increase in diameter? It is less than 50%, and if it's more than, then only it is included in the aneurysm. Now see the important one-liner questions which are asked in relation to aneurysm. First question, what's the most common site of aneurysm? It's the circle of Willis. So the most common site is circle of Willis. Now see the second question, what is the most common site of extracranial aneurysm? And the most common site of extracranial aneurysm is what? Aorta. Which part of aorta? Is the infrarenal aorta. So we are going to discuss the one-liners. First question, that what's the most common site of aneurysm? And the most common site of aneurysm, it's the circle of Willis. Circle of Willis. Very important. Second, what's the most common site of extracranial aneurysm? Okay, what? Extracranial aneurysm. And this is what? Infrarenal aorta. It's the infrarenal aorta. Okay. After infrarenal aorta, what is the second most common site? Yes, it is iliac artery. Iliac artery. After iliac artery, it's the popliteal artery. And after popliteal, it's femoral. Okay. So what's the most common site of extracranial aneurysm? Infrarenal aorta, followed by iliac artery, followed by popliteal artery, followed by femoral artery. Okay, so how to remember? The mnemonic is AIPF. So it's aorta, followed by iliac artery, followed by popliteal artery, followed by femoral artery. So how to remember? All India Police Force: aorta, iliac artery, popliteal artery, femoral artery. Okay. In this statement, there is another question which is hidden, and this was asked many times in NEET PG. What's that question? Can you see? What is the most common site of peripheral arterial aneurysm? So if you see peripheral arterial aneurysm, so that is what? Popliteal. So another question, most common site of peripheral arterial aneurysm. Peripheral arterial aneurysm. Clear? And it's the popliteal artery. This is popliteal. Okay. Now another question, what is the most common site of splanchnic arterial aneurysm? What? Most common site of splanchnic arterial aneurysm, and that is what? Splenic artery. So it's the splenic artery. Splanchnic arterial aneurysm, so that is splenic artery. Okay. After that, there is a term known as mycotic aneurysm, which is seen in infectious condition. So what is the most common site of mycotic aneurysm? And that's femoral artery. Another important point, most common site of mycotic aneurysm. Okay. And most common site of mycotic aneurysm, this is femoral artery followed by abdominal aorta. So femoral artery, and this is followed by aorta. Clear? So these are the important one-liner questions which are frequently asked. Now see, if you see, this is the aneurysm. Clear? So this is known as width or diameter. Okay, so the width or diameter. Now the most fatal complication of aneurysm is rupture, and the risk of rupture is determined by width or diameter of aneurysm. So what you can see here, width or diameter. Clear? And the risk of rupture is determined by this width or diameter. So the width or diameter plays a key role in deciding whether we are going to perform the surgery in the patient or we are not going to perform the surgery. Clear? So what are the indications of surgery? And the indication of surgery is mainly based on the width of diameter. So see, so generally indication of surgery, it's dependent on the width or diameter of aneurysm. Clear? So see, at what diameter we are going to perform the surgery in various types of aneurysm. In cases of descending thoracic aorta, what should be the cutoff diameter? And it should be more than equal to 6.5 centimeter. This is highest. Clear? So for descending thoracic aorta, the cutoff diameter is more than equal to 6.5 centimeter. For abdominal aorta and for ascending aorta, it's same. And how much? It's more than equal to 5.5 centimeter. So for abdominal aorta and ascending aorta, more than equal to 5.5 centimeter. For iliac artery, it's more than equal to 3.5 centimeter, and for femoral artery and popliteal artery, it should be more than equal to 2 centimeter. Which question is most frequently asked? This question is most frequently asked. That what is the cutoff diameter for abdominal aortic aneurysm, and that is more than equal to 5.5 centimeter. There is another very easy way to remember. See, its maximum for descending thoracic aorta, that is 6.5. For abdominal aorta, ascending aorta, it's 5.5. For iliac artery, it's 3.5. And for most of the medium-sized vessels, it is 2 centimeter. Means more than equal to 2 centimeter. And for most of small-sized vessels or arteries, it is more than equal to 1 centimeter. So you have to remember the cutoff diameter for largest vessels. For descending thoracic aorta, abdominal aorta, ascending aorta, iliac artery. For medium-sized vessels, it is more than equal to 2 centimeter. For small-sized vessels, it is more than equal to 1 centimeter. These are the important points related to cutoff diameter. Now see what are the types of aneurysm. So first see what are the various layers in the blood vessel or in artery. So there is innermost layer, that is intima, then there is media, and outermost is adventitia. So apart from endothelium, there is intima, then media, then there is adventitia. So how to remember? From inside out, it is Indian Medical Association, intima, media, adventitia. Now see, the aneurysms are divided into true aneurysms and false aneurysm. In true aneurysm, all the three layers are involved. What? Intima, media, and adventitia. And generally in false aneurysm, all the three layers are not involved. So first, what is true aneurysm? The aneurysm in which all the three layers are involved. Clear? And what is false aneurysm? In which all three layers are not involved. Basic difference. Now see, this true aneurysm is further divided into saccular and fusiform aneurysm. Okay, you see, if there is symmetrical enlargement of whole vessel, means the whole circumference. So if there is symmetrical enlargement of whole circumference, this is known as fusiform. So in fusiform, what? There is symmetrical enlargement. So there is symmetrical enlargement of whole circumference in fusiform. But if you see this saccular aneurysm, in the saccular, there is dilatation of only one part of circumference. So saccular aneurysm affect only one part of circumference. So here can you see? Here there is involvement of only one part of circumference. Clear? So in saccular aneurysm, there is involvement of only one part of circumference. What is the another problem with saccular aneurysm? So in saccular aneurysm, there is high risk of rupture irrespective of width or diameter. So the problem with saccular aneurysm is that there is high risk of rupture. Clear? So these are the types of true aneurysm: fusiform, in which there is symmetrical enlargement; saccular, in which there is involvement of only one part of the circumference. Now see what happens in false aneurysm. Can you see here? There is extravasation of blood, there is tear in intima, and you can see there is no involvement of adventitia. So all three layers are not involved. There is another type known as dissecting aneurysm or dissection aneurysm. So dissecting aneurysm or dissection aneurysm, there are two parts. One, there is aortic dissection, and then there is aneurysmal dilatation. So here what you can see, that there is tear in intima and blood is going to enter into the space between intima and media, followed by aneurysmal dilatation. Clear? So this is what dissection aneurysm. So in dissection aneurysm, what happens? First, there is aortic dissection. So generally there is intimal tear with aneurysmal dilatation of false lumen. So what happens? There is aneurysmal dilatation of false lumen. Clear? So these are the types of aneurysm. Now we are going to discuss in detail the abdominal aortic aneurysm, and in short it's also known as AAA. Abdominal aortic aneurysm is very important, asked in medicine, surgery and radiology. First question, what is the most common site of abdominal aortic aneurysm? So that is infrarenal aorta. And you know what is the most common site of atherosclerosis? Again infrarenal aorta. So there must be some kind of relation. So what's the relation? The relation is that the most common cause of abdominal aortic aneurysm is infrarenal aorta. Let me tell you, in majority of cases, for most of extracranial aneurysm, the most common cause is atherosclerosis, except renal artery aneurysm. In renal artery aneurysm, the most common cause is medial fibroplasia followed by atherosclerosis. Clear? So these are important points. First, that what's the most common site of abdominal aortic aneurysm, and it's the infrarenal aorta. Infrarenal aorta. First question. Okay. Second question, what is the most common site of atherosclerosis? Okay. And the most common site of atherosclerosis, what? Same, infrarenal aorta. So what's the most common cause of abdominal aortic aneurysm? And it's what? Atherosclerosis. It's what? Atherosclerosis. And we discussed, for most of extracranial aneurysms, most common cause is atherosclerosis, except renal artery aneurysm. Renal artery aneurysm. And in renal artery aneurysm, what is the most common cause? It's the medial fibroplasia. The second most common cause is what? Atherosclerosis. So the most common cause is medial fibroplasia. Okay, and second most common cause is atherosclerosis. So directly or indirectly you can see atherosclerosis is involved in most of the extracranial aneurysms. Now see, what is the location of aorta, vena cava? It is located in retroperitoneum. So whenever there is formation of aneurysm or presence of aneurysm, these patients are having chronic vague abdominal pain or back pain. Okay, so question, what's the most common symptom of abdominal aortic aneurysm? So because of retroperitoneal location, these patients have chronic vague abdominal pain or back pain. abdominal pain or back pain. Okay. Another very important point, this was asked many times in AIIMS. What's the most common and lethal complication of abdominal aortic aneurysm? And it's the rupture. And we discussed that rupture is dependent on which one parameter, single most important parameter, which is going to determine the risk of rupture, and it's the width or diameter. So this is the aneurysm, this is the width or diameter. Clear? So width or diameter, this is the most important predictor of rupture of abdominal aortic aneurysm. Clear? And if you see the location, this is inferior vena cava, okay, and this is the aorta. Clear? Imagine this patient is having aortic aneurysm. Clear? So it's the retroperitoneal location. So what's the most common site of rupture? It is retroperitoneal or intraperitoneal. So obviously it is retroperitoneal. And you know the aorta is on the left side. So on which side it is going to rupture? On the left side or on the right side? So it is going to rupture on left side, because on right side what happens? There is inferior vena cava. So this was the question asked in AIIMS, that what is the most common site of rupture of abdominal aortic aneurysm? And it is left retroperitoneal. Clear? So important point, most common site of rupture, it is the left retroperitoneal. And we discussed that what's the most common and most lethal complication, most common and most lethal complication of abdominal aortic aneurysm rupture. Yes, and it is rupture. Now imagine a patient is having rupture of abdominal aortic aneurysm. So what's the triad of rupture? If there is rupture of abdominal aortic aneurysm, so what's the triad? So such patients are having sudden onset of severe abdominal pain or flank pain, there is shock because of rupture, and there is pulsatile abdominal mass. So this is frequently asked question, sudden onset of mid-abdominal or flank pain, there is shock, and there is pulsatile abdominal mass. So this is the triad of abdominal aortic aneurysm rupture. But see, it is not seen in all cases. This triad is only seen in 1/3 of cases. It is only seen in 1/3 of cases. Okay. Now see important points related to investigations. Okay. So what are the investigations which are performed? First, imagine we are going for plain X-ray. So what is the finding on plain X-ray? There is eggshell calcification. In abdominal aortic aneurysm on X-ray, there is eggshell calcification. So there is eggshell pattern of calcification. Okay, one important point. Second, what is the investigation of choice for screening of abdominal aortic aneurysm? And for screening, we are using what? Ultrasound. So another important point, investigation of choice for screening of abdominal aortic aneurysm, and that's ultrasound. This question was asked in NEET PG indirectly. Now see the question. In a patient, abdominal aortic aneurysm was incidentally detected by ultrasound, and at the time of detection, the diameter of abdominal aortic aneurysm was 45 millimeter or 4.5 centimeter. Clear? What should be done next? Yes, so if patient is having asymptomatic aneurysm, obviously we are going to follow up this patient with ultrasound. And at what size we are going to perform the surgery? We discussed what is the indication of surgery. If the diameter is more than equal to 55 mm or 5.5 centimeter. So one option was there that we are going to follow up this patient with ultrasound till the size of aneurysm becomes 55 mm or 5.5 centimeter. Clear? So investigation of choice for screening of abdominal aortic aneurysm, it's ultrasound. Now see another question. Investigation of choice for diagnosis and planning repair of abdominal aortic aneurysm, that is CCT. Now see the twist. If patient is having renal failure, at the place of CCT we are using what? MRI. So two important questions. First, investigation of choice for diagnosis and planning repair of abdominal aortic aneurysm. Clear? And this is CCT. In patients of renal failure, we are not giving the contrast because it is going to increase the risk. Okay, so we are using MRI if patient is having renal failure. So see the addition. Investigation of choice for diagnosis and planning repair of abdominal aortic aneurysm in patients of renal failure. So in patients of renal failure, we go for MRI. Clear? These are the important points related to investigations performed in the patients of abdominal aortic aneurysm. Now see the management aspect. First, what are the indications of surgery? So any condition in which there is increased risk of rupture, we have to go for surgery. Any condition. So what are the indications of surgery? Indications of surgery in abdominal aortic aneurysm. So we already discussed diameter, how much? More than equal to 5.5 centimeter. If patient is having symptomatic aneurysm, it means the risk of complication is higher. Whenever the rate of expansion is more than 1 centimeter per year, in this case also there is high risk of rupture. So rate of expansion is more than 1 centimeter per year, and if the patient is having atypical aneurysm. In atypical aneurysms, there is high risk of rupture. What are those atypical aneurysms in which there is high risk of rupture? And here, size is not a criteria. Presence of such aneurysm is an indication for surgery. So it includes pseudoaneurysm. So if patient is having pseudoaneurysm, we discussed. If patient is having dissecting aneurysm, or what kind of aneurysm? Saccular aneurysm. Clear? So if there is pseudoaneurysm, dissecting aneurysm, saccular aneurysm, these are atypical aneurysms having high risk of rupture, and all these are indications for surgery. The management and complications, this aspect of abdominal aortic aneurysm is very hot topic. It is one of the favorite topic of AIIMS people. They asked that in patients of abdominal aortic aneurysm, which graft is preferred? So generally in management, we go for Dacron graft repair. What kind of repair is done? We go for Dacron graft repair. Clear? And it can be performed. What are the approaches? So we can perform EVAR, or we can go for open approach. Clear? So what is the full form of EVAR? It is endovascular aneurysm repair. Full form? This is endovascular aneurysm repair. Okay? EVAR. Right? Now for open repair, there are two approaches. One is transperitoneal and the second is retroperitoneal. There is transperitoneal and retroperitoneal approach. Okay, which one is preferred? So overall, this transperitoneal approach is preferred. But sometimes the questions are asked that in which particular conditions we are going for retroperitoneal approach. So if patient is having horseshoe kidney, if there is history of previous intra-abdominal surgery, in these cases retroperitoneal approach is preferred. So in which cases we go for retroperitoneal approach? The indications are patients who are having horseshoe kidney, or there is previous history of abdominal surgery. Previous history of abdominal surgery. Okay, now see how it's done. So here you can see the abdominal aortic aneurysm open repair. Okay, so what we do, we are using graft. What's the name of this graft? Is the Dacron graft repair. Clear? It's the Dacron graft repair. So here you can see we are using this Dacron graft. So after opening the aneurysm, we are using what? The Dacron graft. Imagine this is the Dacron graft. So after performing the vascular anastomosis with this graft, we are going to close the wall of aorta or wall of aneurysm over the graft. So here you can see the weakened aortic wall, it is closed over this graft. Clear? So this is how the open repair is done. Now see the mortality rate related to aortic aneurysm repair. If we are going for elective abdominal aortic aneurysm repair, the mortality rate is less than 5%. But if it's ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm repair, how much is the mortality rate? It's more than 50%. So very important point. How much is the mortality rate? Mortality rate after repair. If it's elective repair, it's less than 5%. And if it's ruptured, if it's a case of ruptured aortic aneurysm repair, it is more than 50%. And this was the question which was asked in AIIMS more than 3 times. It was a direct question. The question was, how much is the mortality rate of ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm repair? And it's more than 50%. So see the complications of abdominal aortic aneurysm repair. What are the complications of abdominal aortic aneurysm repair? So first question, what's the most common cause of death after abdominal aortic aneurysm repair? And it is myocardial infarction. So very important, most common cause of death, okay, after abdominal aortic aneurysm repair. Yes, it's myocardial infarction. Clear? But what is the good thing? That in majority of cases there is myocardial infarction, but it's not fatal. So another twist in the question, see the question, what is the most common complication? Is the most common cause of death. MI is most common cause of death. But what is the most common complication after abdominal aortic aneurysm repair? And this is non-fatal MI. This is non-fatal myocardial infarction followed by renal failure. Clear? So in majority of cases there is MI which is fatal or non-fatal? Non-fatal. But most common cause of death after abdominal aortic aneurysm repair, that is myocardial infarction. See what are the other complications? Other complications which are seen after repair. So there is bleeding. Sometimes there is leak from the graft. There is paraparesis. So which artery is injured? Because of injury of which artery there is paraparesis? So it is because of injury of arteria radicularis magna. This was asked once in anatomy. Injury of arteria radicularis magna. Okay, and what is the other name of this artery? It is known as artery of, it's also known as artery of Adam-Kiewicz. Adam-Kiewicz. Clear? So paraparesis occurs. Why? Because there is injury of arteria radicularis magna, which is also known as artery of Adam-Kiewicz. There can be infection or there can be colonic ischemia. So these are the complications of abdominal aortic aneurysm repair. So there is a classification system which is frequently asked in relation to thoraco-abdominal aneurysm. Which one? Thoraco-abdominal aortic aneurysm, and the name is modified Crawford. It's the modified Crawford classification. Clear? And it's for thoraco-abdominal aortic aneurysm. So here you can see thoraco-abdominal aortic aneurysm. Clear? It is divided into 5 types. Okay, now see type 1. Now see here, you can see that this is left subclavian artery. So this is the origin of left subclavian artery, and here you can see this is the renal artery. Clear? So this is what? Renal artery. So what is type 1 or extent 1, in which the extent is from the origin of left subclavian artery till the renal artery, so till suprarenal aorta. So in type 1, what's the extent? It's from left subclavian artery till suprarenal aorta. Clear? Now see what's type 2. Here also you can see it's from left subclavian artery, and from left subclavian artery, what's the extent? Can you see? This is aorto-iliac bifurcation. So in type 2, you can see the extent starting from the origin of left subclavian artery, and the extent is up to aorto-iliac bifurcation. Now see this type 3. Here you can see this is the descending thoracic aorta, and what's the extent? It is still aorto-iliac bifurcation. So in type 3, the extent is from descending thoracic aorta till aorto-iliac bifurcation. If you see the type 4, here this aneurysm is confined or limited to abdominal aorta. So this is limited to abdominal aorta. Okay, and if you see the extent 5 or type 5, here it starts from descending thoracic aorta and it is extending till, can you see here, superior mesenteric artery. So the extent from descending thoracic aorta till superior mesenteric artery. These are the 5 types. If you see these 5 types, see which one is most extensive. So if you see, it's the type 2 which is most extensive. How much is the extent? It starts from the origin of left subclavian artery and it extends up to aorto-iliac bifurcation. Clear? So this is modified Crawford classification. So let's revise quickly. Type 1, from left subclavian artery to suprarenal aorta, you saw. Type 2 was most extensive. The extent was from left subclavian artery till aorto-iliac bifurcation. In type 3, it was from descending thoracic aorta till aorto-iliac bifurcation. And in type 4, it was limited to abdominal aorta, and in type 5, it was from distal thoracic aorta till superior mesenteric artery. Clear? So these are the 5 types, and this is known as what? Modified Crawford classification for thoraco-abdominal aneurysm. Now see what is mycotic aneurysm. So in this you can see that there is focal dilatation of artery. Clear? Can you see? And what is the site of this focal dilatation? It is occurring at the points in arterial wall which is weakened by infection. So it is not related to fungus, it is related to infection. So what is mycotic aneurysm? In this case, there is focal dilatation of arteries. Where? At the points in arterial wall which is weakened by infection. Okay, so what is the most common site? It's very easy to understand. First, it's a misnomer. Why? Because it is caused by bacteria, not by fungus. Okay, now see which vessel is most commonly involved or most commonly affected. This vessel is commonly used by interns also for sampling. Generally, we take sampling from this vein. But sometimes what happens, if the superficial veins are thrombosed, then sometimes we are taking the sample from femoral. And if you are not going to clean that area, yes, what happens? Sometimes we are going to introduce the infection from the skin into artery. This femoral artery is also used by radiologist, by cardiologist, and sometimes by IV drug abusers. Clear? So the most common vessel affected is femoral artery, followed by aorta. Now what is the most common organism responsible? You must be knowing that what is the organism present in the skin? It's Staph aureus. So 2 important points. First, what's the most common artery involved? Clear? And the most common artery involved, it's femoral, followed by aorta. Simple. And what's the most common organism responsible? And it's the Staph aureus followed by Salmonella. Clear? So this is Staph aureus followed by Salmonella. So these are the important points related to mycotic aneurysm. Now we are going to discuss the aortic dissection. So what's happening here? There is dissection of aorta. How this aortic dissection occurs? Generally there is tear in the intima. So because of circumferential or transverse tear in the intima, blood enters into the space between intima and media. So this blood is going to enter under pressure and it is going to cause the dissection of aorta. So this is aortic dissection. So in this case, you can see that this innermost lining is endothelium, this is intima, this is media, and this is adventitia. So what's the problem? You can see here that there is tear in intima. So what happens? Because of this tear, you can notice that the blood starts going into this false lumen, and this false lumen is in between intima and media. So this is intima media space, and what happens? The blood is going into this space under pressure, so it is going to cause the dissection of aorta. So what's the problem in aortic dissection? There is tear in intima. What kind of? It can be circumferential or transverse. Because of this tear, what happens? Blood enters where? Into intima media space. Intima media space. Clear? And because of that, what will happen? There is separation of inner and middle layer. So this is dissection. So what happens? You can see there is separation of inner and middle layer. Question: what is the most common site of aortic dissection? And it's the ascending aorta. Which wall? It's the right lateral wall. Okay. So what's the most common site of aortic dissection? It's the right lateral wall. Okay, of ascending aorta. Generally, this condition is more common in males and it is generally seen in 6th to 7th decade. So it is more common in males and it is seen in 6th to 7th decade. Clear? What are the risk factors? See, the most important risk factor is what? Systemic hypertension. So what are the risk factors? The most important risk factor is systemic hypertension. Other risk factors are cystic medial necrosis. It can also occur in 3rd trimester of pregnancy. Now see the important classification in relation to aortic dissection. There are 2 classifications which are frequently asked. One is DeBakey classification and the second is Stanford classification. So see these classifications. Now see, according to DeBakey, what is DeBakey type 1? So in type 1, you can see that there is intimal tear. Where is the intimal tear? The intimal tear is there in ascending aorta. And can you see what's the extent? It is extending up to descending aorta. So there is intimal tear in ascending aorta and it is also involving descending aorta. This is type 1. DeBakey type 1. Overall, this is the most common type, responsible for 60% cases. Now see the DeBakey type 2. In DeBakey type 2, you can see that there is intimal tear in ascending aorta. In ascending aorta, there is intimal tear. But here you can see this dissection is confined to ascending aorta, or it is limited to ascending aorta. In type 3, you can see that there is intimal tear in descending aorta. Okay, so here you can see that there is intimal tear in descending aorta and there is distal propagation. So there is distal propagation. So these are the 3 types. Now, if you see the Stanford classification, it is divided into Stanford A, which is proximal, and Stanford B, which is distal. DeBakey type 1 and DeBakey type 2, it's included in Stanford A, and the DeBakey type 3, this is Stanford B. Overall, if you see which one is most common, DeBakey type 1 followed by type 3 followed by type 2. So these are the classifications asked in relation to aortic dissection. So let's revise quickly the DeBakey classification first. DeBakey, so type 1, there is intimal tear in ascending aorta extending to descending aorta. In type 2, there is intimal tear in ascending aorta and the dissection is limited to ascending aorta. And in type 3, there is intimal tear in descending aorta with distal propagation. And we discussed, if you see Stanford type 1 and type 2 is included in Stanford type A, and this one is Stanford type B. A is proximal, B is distal. Now see the location. So if you notice, in majority of cases, what happens, there is aortic dissection which is involving which part of aorta? The part of aorta which is located in the thorax. So if there is aortic dissection in the part of aorta which is located in the thorax, the symptoms will be also seen in the thorax. So these patients will be having sudden onset of severe chest pain, and there is radiation to interscapular region. So see what are the clinical features. It will be related to thorax or chest. So what happens, there is sudden onset of severe chest pain, clear, and this chest pain is radiating to interscapular region, okay. So migration of pain occurs with propagation of dissection. So what happens, another important point, migration of pain, and it occurs with propagation of dissection. Clear? So apart from these symptoms, these patients are having syncope, dyspnea, hypotension or shock. So there is syncope, there can be dyspnea, hypotension or shock. Okay, so these are the clinical manifestations. So what are the findings on chest x-ray? So there is widening of superior mediastinum, and there is pleural effusion also, and obviously it is on which side? Left sided. So what are the findings on chest x-ray? So in investigations, if chest x-ray is done, there is widening of superior mediastinum, widening of superior mediastinum, and there is pleural effusion. Generally this pleural effusion is seen on which side? So there is left sided pleural effusion. Okay, this is one important point. Second, investigation of choice is asked for aortic dissection, and the investigation of choice is dependent on the general condition of patient, whether patient is stable at the time of presentation or patient is unstable. At the time of presentation, if patient is stable, the investigation of choice is CT angio. We go for CT angio. And if patient is unstable, we go for transesophageal echocardiography. So what's the investigation of choice for diagnosis of aortic dissection? Okay, important point, whether patient is stable or unstable. So stable patient and see unstable. Okay, so in stable it is CT angio, and in unstable it's transesophageal echocardiography. So read the question carefully, whether in the question patient is stable or unstable. So generally they are not giving it directly, they are going to mention that the pulse rate is more than 100 and the systolic blood pressure is less than 100. Clear? So if the patient is having tachycardia or shock, obviously patient is unstable, we will go for transesophageal echocardiography, or And the second situation, if the patient is stable, we go for CT angio. So what's the treatment? We go for emergency Dacron graft repair. This was asked in AIIMS. So see the treatment of aortic dissection, emergency Dacron graft repair. Clear? So this is how we manage the patients of aortic dissection. Now see this image. Here what you can notice that there is aortic rupture. What? You can notice that there is aortic rupture. And what is the location? You can see this is adjacent to ligamentum arteriosum. Can you see? This structure is ligamentum arteriosum. So adjacent to ligamentum arteriosum there is aortic rupture, and this is traumatic aortic rupture. So first important point, that what is the most common site of traumatic aortic rupture? It's the adjacent to ligamentum arteriosum. So important point, most common site of traumatic aortic rupture is adjacent to, it's the adjacent to ligamentum arteriosum. Okay, ligamentum arteriosum. Now see, this traumatic aortic rupture, it leads to sudden death in the patients after road traffic accidents or after fall from great height. So most of the patients who are having traumatic aortic rupture, they are brought dead to the emergency. So important point, it leads to sudden death. Okay, sudden death in patients after road traffic accidents or in the patients with fall from great heights. Fall from great heights. Okay, so traumatic aortic rupture is one of the causes of sudden death in patients of trauma. So how much is the mortality rate? You can't believe that the mortality rate of traumatic aortic rupture is 75 to 90%. So it is having very high mortality rate. How much? 75 to 90%. See, only 15 to 20% patients are brought alive to the hospital. How many? Only 15 to 20% patients are brought alive to the hospital. Okay, and the patients who are brought alive to the hospital, here the site of rupture is a bit different. So in these patients, what's the most common site of rupture? Most common site of aortic rupture. So indirectly this question is asked that the patients who are brought alive to the hospital, what is the most common site of aortic rupture? And this is aortic isthmus. So what's the site? So what's the site? It's aortic isthmus followed by ascending aorta. So this is aortic isthmus followed by ascending aorta. Okay, so I'm repeating two questions. Overall, what's the most common site of traumatic aortic rupture? It's the adjacent to ligamentum arteriosum, and the patients who are brought alive to the hospital, in those cases most common site is aortic isthmus followed by ascending aorta. Now see the questions related to investigations. If we are going to perform the chest x-ray, there is widened mediastinum. So on chest x-ray, what's the finding? There is widened mediastinum. Okay, second important point, that what's the gold standard investigation for traumatic aortic rupture? And the gold standard investigation is aortography. So what's the gold standard investigation for traumatic aortic rupture? It's aortography. Okay, we discussed that in aortic dissection we were performing CT angio in stable patient and transesophageal echocardiography in unstable patients. So these two investigations are also helpful in traumatic aortic rupture. So here CT and transesophageal echocardiography, these are also helpful, right? Now what are the treatment options for traumatic aortic rupture? We can go for endovascular intra-aortic stenting, so that we are going to bypass the site of tear, or we can go for Dacron repair. So what are the treatment treatment options, we can go for endovascular, intra-aortic stenting, or we can go for Dacron graft repair. So second is Dacron graft repair. So this is how we manage the patients of traumatic aortic rupture. In surgery, we perform certain maneuvers for retroperitoneal exposure. So see what are the maneuvers which are performed for retroperitoneal exposure. Maneuvers performed for retroperitoneal exposure. So we perform Cocker's maneuver. There is extended Cocker's maneuver. What is the other name of extended Cocker's maneuver? It is also known as right-sided medial visceral rotation. There is Mattock's maneuver. What is the other name? It is known as left-sided medial visceral rotation. And there is Kettleblash maneuver. One by one we are going to discuss. These are very, very important, and these topics are asked frequently in AIIMS. So in this image you can see that there is mobilization of duodenum or medialization of duodenum. Can you see this is duodenum? So here you can see that there is mobilization or medialization of duodenum, and this is also known as Cockerization, and the name of this maneuver is known as Cocker's maneuver. So what's the name? The name of this maneuver, it's Cocker's maneuver. Cocker's maneuver. Clear? So what we do in Cocker's maneuver, here you can see there is mobilization of duodenum, or we perform the medial rotation. Okay, so whenever you are going to perform the mobilization of this duodenum, what we are going to see? So we are going to visualize. Can you see head of pancreas? This is what head of pancreas. What else you can see? You can see this second part of duodenum, and whatever the structures which are located posterior to pancreas and second part of duodenum, like what? Here you can see IVC. Clear? So whatever the structures which are located posterior to second part of duodenum and head of pancreas, you can visualize. So Cocker's maneuver, it is going to expose, or it exposes. So we saw first head of pancreas. It's going to expose second part of duodenum. Okay, and the structures located posterior to head of pancreas and second part of duodenum. We are going to perform this maneuver in one of the famous surgery. Which one? Whipple's procedure. So Cocker's maneuver is performed in which surgery? Whipple's procedure. Clear? So these are important points related to Cocker's maneuver. Now see, in this image you can notice that this is what? Duodenum, and this is what? Right colon. Clear? So you can notice that this duodenum and right colon, it is rotated medially. So what is the name? This is right-sided medial visceral rotation, and we discussed what is the other name. This is extended Cocker's maneuver. So what's the name of this maneuver? This is extended Cocker's maneuver. Extended Cocker's maneuver, and we discussed that what's the other name of this extended Cocker's maneuver? This is also known as right-sided medial visceral rotation. Okay, so what we are going to do here you can notice that right colon and duodenum, the name is right-sided medial visceral rotation. So right colon and duodenum, it is rotated medially. Clear? And if these structures are rotated medially, it is going to expose. So see here, the right colon and duodenum is rotated medially, and it is going to expose what? Inferior vena cava. Here you can see aorta. Which part? Infrarenal aorta. So it is going to expose inferior vena cava, infrarenal aorta. Here you can see this artery. What is this artery? This is right renal artery, right renal artery. Okay, and here you can see what iliac vessels, iliac vessels. Okay, this question is asked in exam. So this maneuver, it's going to expose, so it exposes which structures? Inferior vena cava, infrarenal aorta, right renal artery, and iliac vessels. It was asked in AIIMS, this maneuver was asked in AIIMS, that extended Cocker's maneuver is used for drainage of which hematoma? So it is used for drainage of inframesocolic hematoma. So extended Cocker's maneuver, it is used for drainage of inframesocolic hematoma. Okay, inframesocolic hematoma. Now see this image. Here you can see that this is the left kidney, this is the left colon, this is the pancreas, and this is the spleen. So here you are going to notice that left kidney, left colon, pancreas and spleen, it is rotated medially and these structures are brought to the midline. What's the name of this maneuver? This is left-sided medial visceral rotation. Name? Left-sided medial visceral rotation. And what's the other name? This is Mattox maneuver. So what's the name of this maneuver? This is known as Mattox maneuver. Clear? The other name of this Mattox maneuver is left-sided medial visceral rotation. So which structures are rotated medially and brought to the midline? Here, left kidney, left colon, spleen and pancreas. Clear? These structures are rotated medially and these structures are brought to the midline. Right? This maneuver, you can see, this maneuver is going to expose which structures? So here you can see entire abdominal aorta, entire length of abdominal aorta. So it is going to expose entire length of abdominal aorta. Okay, now see, what's the name of this artery? Here there is superior mesenteric artery. Okay, what is the name of this artery? This is left renal artery, and here you can see this one is inferior mesenteric artery. So Mattox maneuver is going to expose the proximal part of superior mesenteric artery, left renal artery and inferior mesenteric artery. So apart from entire length of abdominal aorta, it's going to expose the proximal part. What? Proximal part of superior mesenteric artery, left renal artery and inferior mesenteric artery. Inferior mesenteric artery. And Mattox maneuver is used for drainage of central supramesocolic hematoma. Which one? It is used for drainage of, you have to remember, central supramesocolic hematoma. Okay, we discussed that extended Cocker's maneuver is used for drainage of inframesocolic hematoma. Mattox, it is used for drainage of central supramesocolic hematoma. Now see this image. Here you can see that this is right colon. Okay, this is what the second part of duodenum, and this is what head of pancreas. So right colon, second part of duodenum and head of pancreas, it is mobilized medially. So this is done for extensive retroperitoneal exposure, and the name of this maneuver, it's known as Kettle-Brash maneuver. So what's the name of this maneuver? This is known as Kettle-Brash maneuver. Okay, and this Kettle-Brash maneuver, it is performed for extensive retroperitoneal exposure. So it is done for extensive retroperitoneal exposure. Okay, so here you notice what are the structures which are mobilized medially. So here we mobilize right colon, duodenum and head of pancreas. So right colon, duodenum and head of pancreas. Clear? These structures are mobilized medially. Okay, so this cattle brush maneuver, it is going to expose which structure? So here you can see that it is going to expose what? Inferior vena cava. You can see what's the name of this vein? This is right renal vein, and what? This is iliac vein. And what else? The infrapancreatic segments. Clear? So it's going to expose, or it exposes, you can see inferior vena cava, you can see here right renal vein, here you can see what? Iliac veins, and what else? Infrapancreatic segments. Okay, so here infrapancreatic segments. Okay, so the name of this maneuver is cattle brush maneuver. So these were the maneuvers which were performed for retroperitoneal exposure. Now we are going to discuss the vascular grafts. Almost every year there is one question in NEET, PG and AIIMS related to this vascular graft. Okay, so first see what are the types of vascular graft. It is of two types, bioprosthetic and synthetic. So the types: bioprosthetic and synthetic. Okay, bioprosthetic is further divided into autograft. Auto means when the patient's own tissues are used, so patient's own vessels are used, this is autograft. Then there is allograft. Allograft is also known as homograft. Allo means when the graft is taken from the same species. Then there is xenograft, which is also known as heterograft. In these cases the graft is taken from the different species. So the types: first, it's autograft when patient's own tissues are used. Second is allograft. The other name of allograft is homograft, when graft is taken from same species. Then there is xenograft, also known as heterograft. Xeno is also known as heterograft. Clear? Graft is taken from different species and it can be tissue engineered, means prepared in laboratory. Tissue engineered, it's prepared in laboratory. Synthetic graft is further divided into textile and non-textile. And long back in All India, this question was asked that what is the synthetic textile vascular graft? So the synthetic textile vascular graft, it's the Dacron. Clear? And Dacron is most commonly used synthetic graft. It's the most commonly used synthetic graft. Then there are non-textile synthetic grafts. Non-textile synthetic grafts. And what are the types? First is EPTFE. What is the full form of EPTFE? E, expanded polytetrafluoroethylene. So it's EPTFE, expanded polytetrafluoroethylene. And the second is polyurethane. Polyurethane. Now see the one-liner questions related to vascular graft. First, what is the best natural vascular graft? And the best natural vascular graft is reverse long saphenous vein. What is the best synthetic vascular graft? And we discussed it is Dacron. So two important questions. First, best natural vascular graft. Okay, and best natural vascular graft, that's the reversed long saphenous vein. What's the meaning of reversed long saphenous vein? Long saphenous vein is having valves, so generally we reverse it and then we use it for graft. Second, what is the best synthetic vascular graft? And this is what? Dacron. Okay, now see second question. Preferred graft for infrainguinal bypass and the preferred graft for suprainguinal bypass. So if you see the inguinal ligament, below inguinal ligament, there is presence of medium sized vessels and small sized vessels. For such vessels we are using long saphenous vein. So if you see suprainguinal bypass, here there is presence of large vessels like aorta. So for such bypass we are using Dacron. So two important questions. First, preferred vascular graft for first suprainguinal bypass, and the second is infrainguinal bypass. Clear? So for suprainguinal, above inguinal ligament, and that is Dacron. Why? Because there is presence of large vessels, and for infrainguinal bypass it is long saphenous vein. Now see the questions related to grafts used in coronary artery bypass grafting. In short, it is known as CABG. So what we do in CABG, coronary artery bypass grafting. So imagine that there is some site of occlusion. Here you can see there is site of occlusion, and we are using a graft to bypass the site of occlusion. So what is the most preferred graft used for CABG? And we use what? LIMA, that is left internal mammary artery. And what is most commonly used graft? That is long saphenous vein. See, why arterial grafts are preferred over venous graft? See, arterial graft is having non-collapsible lumen and the venous graft is having collapsible lumen. That's why in systole this venous graft is going to open, and in diastole its lumen is going to collapse, but the arterial lumen is patent throughout systole and diastole. That's why the patency rate of arterial graft is longer as compared to, or higher as compared to, venous graft. So if the question is asked what is most preferred graft for CABG, then it is left internal mammary artery because of longer patency rate, higher patency rate. What is the advantage of long saphenous vein? That it is having extra length. It's very long. And generally we perform CABG in patients who are having occlusion in more than 2 arteries. So you require length. So what is the most commonly used graft in CABG? And that is long saphenous vein. So here you can see that we are using internal mammary artery. Which one? Left. So in short it is known as LIMA. LIMA is most preferred. It's most preferred vascular graft for CABG. And here you can see this is saphenous vein. Clear? So long saphenous vein, it is most commonly used graft. Read the question carefully. And why it is most commonly used graft? Because of extra length. Clear? So long saphenous vein is long, right? So this is the advantage. It is most commonly used in CABG. And why left internal mammary artery is most preferred? Because of higher patency rate as compared to long saphenous vein. Now see, a similar question was asked in AIIMS. Here you can see that there is bilateral iliac artery occlusion. So what's the problem here? There is bilateral iliac artery occlusion. So if there is bilateral iliac artery occlusion, we are going for a bypass. What's the name? Can you see? This is aorta, and this is what? Femoral artery. Clear? Femoral artery. So what's the name of this bypass? This is aortofemoral bypass. And in this aortofemoral bypass, what is the preferred graft? Yes, so it's a synthetic graft. Which one? Dacron. This question was also asked in AIIMS. Clear? So if we go for aortofemoral bypass, and it's done in which condition? When the patient is having bilateral iliac artery occlusion. What's the preferred graft? and that's Dacron. So any bypass in which aorta is involved means whenever in bypass we are using a large vessel. So generally in these cases the preferred graft is Dacron. So this is all about arterial disorders.